The first guest of the evening is truly a poet. He's an artist. He is a friend and an inspiration to anyone who I think who has ever played the guitar or tried to write poetry. Would you please welcome Gordon Lightfoot?
Say what you will, I will miss you, my friends. Let me move along, for the road never ends. Vowing to live till the end of all time, all the way to the ends of the earth, because I'm waiting for you to say you will be mine. This is Carefree Highway Revisited, the show that celebrates Gordon Lightfoot's music song by song, a proud member of the That's Not Canon podcast network. I'm your host, Mike Messner, and with me today is a fellow Lightfoot fan and a good friend, making her fourth appearance on the show, from Chippewa, Quebec, Adele Chalifoux. Adele, it's great to see you again, and I'm glad you were able to make time because I know it is very, very cold up where you are right now.
It is very cold. Actually, it's like an El Nino year, so things are not normally as nice as they have been, I should say. We just got snow really for the first time since October, since Halloween, a week or two ago. So it's been actually quite nice, but the lake's not frozen over. It's not as cold as some places in the States I hear right now, but it's about minus 25 last night. So it's pretty cold, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was watching a football game 1 or 2 nights ago where it was supposedly, if you factor in the wind chill, it was 27 below zero.
Oh, yeah.
And as a California kid, I mean, that doesn't register. I mean, we do not get weather that cold in the San Francisco Bay Area. Yeah, but that is pretty cold. So today we're talking about Waiting for You, which of course is the title track to Gordon's 1993 album. But it's not a song that's particularly well known in the Lightfoot canon. And I know for me, I love it because it's a return to form in some ways. This is folk music. It has an Irish flavor to it. The instrumentation is the way he used to do it back before Endless Wire and Salute and all of those. And the man still sounds like he's in his 30s. I mean, I think he's in his mid-50s when he did this. But his voice still sounds like the Lightfoot that we all got hooked on when he first became a phenomenon or when he first started his career. So that's why I love the song. Why did you want to talk about it in particular today?
I've just always loved this song. It reminds me of, well, home. It reminds me of all things Canada. It reminds me of Gord is so great at giving us such vivid depictions of places and things, and it just reminds me of our weather, how beautiful our country is, our geography. I'm a lover of the snow, so that is worked in there. And our skies, you know, we have beautiful starlit skies, and especially where I am, there's no light, so pitch black, and you can see almost everything. It evokes a lot of images of my own travels across the country, and whether that's driving or flying. And it's sad that this song isn't more well known because I think it's just beautiful, really.
It really is a beautiful song, and we'll come back to why it's not well known a little bit later. I think you have sort of an anecdote about this song, though. I'm not talking about when it was originally released, but it does have a special significance for you because of a particular part of your life, doesn't it?
It does, actually. Yeah, it absolutely does. I was about 5 when this song came out, so I was a little too young to remember it. But I have a 2-year-old child, toddler, feral at this point. But when I was pregnant with him, this song just played through my mind a lot, and especially the last couple of lines, some soft-hearted lovers whose goals are in sight. My husband and I, we live in the bush on a lake and surrounded by nature, and we would go and sit on the end of the dock and dangle our feet in the water. And I was very, very pregnant at this time, and that line just always ran through my head. And, you know, as he touched my stomach and we felt the baby kicking and all that stuff, you know, it just reminded me of that line. It was just so poignant, you know, whose goals are in sight. I was set to have my son anytime. And it's just such a personal song and feeling. And I always think of that. Whenever that line comes on, I smile a little bit. Thank God I'm not pregnant anymore, but, you know, it brings me back to that time.
Yeah, the pregnancy probably had aspects that weren't all that fun, but I can certainly understand why you wanted to talk about it, because it really does come to the heart of who you are as a Canadian and also as a mom with that particular line. Besides sitting on the dock with your feet in the water, is there a particular setting that you think this would be perfect to listen to?
I think for me, it would be, driving on a road trip or anywhere just quiet. I think this is one of the songs, one of many of Gord's songs that you just really need to listen to the lyrics because they are pretty poetic and beautiful. And there's a lot of lyrics there. So just a quiet place to really think about it and just let those images come to the forefront and just see what happens. That's for me where I would listen to it.
For me, it's one of the relatively few songs where there's no specific time, place, activity that's conjured up for me. Now, part of that is because it doesn't have the same kind of deep resonance from me as it does for you. But this is a song that I think I could probably listen to on a hot summer day, driving through the Central Valley, or on a rainy day here in California, or on a plane heading east somewhere. I could probably listen to it anywhere and enjoy it. It just wouldn't evoke the same smells, the same visions, the same kind of sensory stuff that many of his songs do evoke. It just takes you just to some particular place and time in your life. Now, the song itself, of course, it came out in 1993 on the Waiting for You album. We don't know quite when it was written, but Gordon did say he was doing a recorded song in Reno, Nevada in 2003, and he introduced the song by saying, "This is about making babies in the North Country." And he was probably being a little tongue-in-cheek about that because it's not a particularly sexy song. It's not a sensual song in the sense of being sultry. And we know that Gordon has written some songs that probably could go in that kind of movie.
Absolutely.
He certainly has a heart for that, or had a heart for that. It doesn't strike me as a particularly romantic song, but it does sound like a song about home, about domesticity, about raising a family. And he did dedicate the album to his son Miles and his then wife Elizabeth. But we don't know a whole lot about the specifics of how it got written. I have a quotation from him on it, but is there anything you wanted to add before I read that?
I couldn't really find a lot. I looked in a couple of books, and I looked in the Nicholas Jennings book, and I also looked in Once Upon a Red Eye, and there wasn't much written other than what you've said. So I think that's true to a lot of his stuff. It's all kind of shrouded in a little bit of mystery, which kind of adds more to the intrigue about his recordings and things. But maybe he was homesick when he wrote this song. Maybe he was flying back from a gig. Other than that, no, I couldn't find anything about it.
He does allude to the idea that he's flying back from a gig, and that means that he's anticipating being home, and whether that's homesickness or not. He did say, and I'm quoting from the songbook liner notes, "The concept of flying at night is very strong in there," that is, in the song. "We're coming home from a gig and flying back to Toronto as we do after almost every show," because Lightfoot would go fly out, play the gigs, and then be back home for the bulk of the week. At least that's what Richard Harrison had said. "I was writing a batch of songs and we were traveling at night a lot then, but it has other imagery in there as well. There's even a little of the USS Arizona when I wrote, 'We could be trapped between decks eternally.' How something about Pearl Harbor made it in there, I'm not quite sure. Maybe it was the fact that war in the Middle East was brewing," end quote. So that says to me that he probably wrote it in 90 or 91, because that was when the Gulf War was about to happen or had started happening, although it was a very, very short war. So that may give us a clue about when it was written, but it certainly gives us the idea of returning home to some degree or another. I still don't know how he worked Pearl Harbor into it. It's one of those things we'll never know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you could be right about the timing of the song, because I did read that the album took him about 2.5 years to write all the material for. So that would put it in line with the early 90s, as you said. And who knows with Gordon, he was such a smart man and he saw so many things and traveled so many places. He was probably just like a sponge. And I think his life experiences and everything just kind of all seeped its way into his music in one way or another. And he did love sailing. You know, he has a big connection with water. So all of it, probably.
Yeah. But this does make me think that this song could have been on Edge of Midnight, because when he was making that album, this was back in 86, he had announced or alluded or implied that this was going to be it. He was not going to have any more solo albums after this. In as much as this is a song about going home, and this is a good way to get into the lyrics, say what you will, I will miss you, my friends. So he's saying goodbye to something and someone. And that was kind of the tone of East of Midnight. And it winds up here. And thank God it did, because it's a beautiful song. But it does make me think that this is something that is a farewell, but it's also for somebody that we know is just returning, because he had like a 7-year hiatus between East of Midnight and then Waiting for You. Any thoughts on that first part of the lyrics?
I think you hit it right on. I've never made that connection before, but I think it could definitely be that. And he, you know, at that point in the 90s, as you said, I think he was almost 30 years into his career. He's probably said goodbye to a lot of people over the years and knew a lot of people over the years, whether that's friendships, career-wise, relationships. So it could be that. To me, it also makes me think of his constant touring and being on the road. And I mean, he toured right up until the end of his life, really. So one place after the other, after the other, after the other. You know, that connection with the audience, I think, is something that us mere mortals don't necessarily understand. You might look at them as friends after. So for me, that's what it brings into my mind. And it also makes me think perhaps it could be analogy for him growing as a person, because the 90s Gordon wasn't the same as the 60s and 70s Gordon, that's for sure. So it could also be that code for him growing as a person in every kind of which way as well. So it's a deep line. I don't think we'll ever know exactly the root of it.
But it is a beautiful way to start a song. And you're right that every audience that he performed for, at some point he had to say goodnight. I got to go to sleep. Our time is up. We got to go. It's late, etc. So along with the joy of performing, there's also the reality of the curtain's got to fall. The audience has to leave. So there is a certain goodbye to it. Vowing to live till the end of all time, all the way to the ends of the earth, because I'm waiting for you to say you will be mine. So now he's talking to one specific person, and it's ostensibly his wife, Elizabeth, at the time. Mm-hmm. It sounds like he's concerned that she won't be his. I don't know how long they had been together. We don't really know when this song was written. So I'm wondering, why do you think he has this concern?
I'm not sure. I think ultimately he was such a hopeless romantic, and romance was, I think, always played huge on his mind. This is definitely in his music. Maybe he was a little, I don't want to say worried that maybe she would leave him, but not a lot is known about Elizabeth Moon. I have seen a few pictures and she was absolutely stunning. She was just, oh my God, she was beautiful. So maybe that could have played into it. And I know there was like a 20 or so year age gap. So maybe that played into it a little bit, insecurity. Maybe he was just hoping that they were going to be together until the very end. He had his fair share of quite tumultuous relationships by then. So maybe it was just him kind of being hopeful in a poetic way.
Yeah, or he had been burned so badly. He'd been married once, that didn't work out, and he'd been burned badly in romance that maybe he's thinking to himself, this is too good to be true. I'm with this beautiful woman who's willing to have my children, et cetera, et cetera. And he's thinking to himself, how on earth did I get so lucky to do this?
I could see that. Yeah.
Many long days, many long years, many wrong plays, many wrong fears. This is a quick retrospective of his career at this point, and it's vague enough so that he's not getting into it, but he's kind of saying in so many words, wow, I've had quite a career.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think at that point, 30 years in, and being an older man at that point, he was in his 50s, I think, you become more insightful over the years. I know I'm in my mid-30s and I can look back on things in my life and go, oh, I did that, or that was not a good choice, whatever it may be. So he for sure got more insightful as the years gone by, and probably more honest and humble about the mistakes and the things he had been through in his life. That's what it feels like to me he's talking about there, which is so relatable.
To say midlife crisis is probably a little bit too easy because that's kind of a cliche, but it is something that men talk about to the extent that they're intimate with each other verbally. They do talk about this idea of you get to your late 40s, your mid 50s, you've achieved XXX, you've made mistakes with Y, and then you realize I don't have that much time left. And what do I do either to make up for it? What do I do to check things off the bucket list? We know that men tend to live a little less long than women do chronologically. So there's a certain amount of catharsis that he may have been going through at that particular time. Thankfully, he doesn't dwell on it in this particular song, because that would have sent the song into something. I don't want to listen to this. I'm not in this to hear your confessional. That's something for another song. We'll be right back to our conversation with Adele Chalifoux about Waiting for You. But first, a word from a podcast partner or two.
Hey, do you like classic albums? Technically, like the 20th century albums, such as like Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones. I've only had Beatle episodes so far, however, I'll be doing more. But welcome to my show, or rather, hey, welcome to check out my show. All those years ago, a classic album podcast with the dipping sauce. As you can see, the George Harrison reference. I review classic albums, not of those the likes of Beethoven, the likes of the Beatles and Rolling Stones, and like I mentioned earlier, or what have you. So yeah, check it out. It's every Monday. I do albums, conspiracies, songs, all that jazz. So just check it out. All those years ago, a classic album podcast, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Books Boys. Every month, the Dean and PJ tell you all about the books they've been reading and make some recommendations from our old favourites, plus surprise call-ins from authors to talk about the works that they're writing, original music, prize giveaways, and more. That's Books Boys on booksboys.com and all good podcatchers. Books Boys. Get it. Buy it. Books.
I could be tossed in the arms of the sea. I could be caught between decks eternally. And this is where he's maybe alluding to the USS Arizona and Pearl Harbor. And as a quick side trip, I've seen the Arizona. I've been to Pearl Harbor, and it's a gut check to realize that there were that many men and women who died in that particular attack. But he has talked about shipwrecks. I mean, Ballad of Yarmouth Castle, Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and many others. So it may be this quick allusion to some of the other stuff. But as you said, he also just has a great affection, a great love for being on boats in water. And I would think particularly in the rivers and lakes of Canada.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he went on countless canoe trips, and didn't he own a yacht at some point, or a sailboat or something? And I think with one of his, not the first Kathy, but the second Kathy, I think she went sailing with him quite a bit in Georgian Bay and things like that. So this man he loved his nature, and he got it in there as much as he could. And to me, it makes me think that he would love to just be on a boat forever, retire on a yacht and just go cruising, living his life out that way. I think he would have been happy with it.
I think he would have been happy in as much as he could be happy at all with retirement, because he had left the industry in 86, and 7 years later, for reasons we don't really know, here he is back. When he could have ridden off into the sunset, I'll bet you he probably had all the money he needed. But I think he loved performing as much as he loved being out on the water and in nature, if not more so, because one made the other possible to some degree. Waiting for you to ask what's keeping me. I thought that was a great way to end that, because he's hoping, hey, do you need me? Do you want me to come home? Or is it just, oh, yeah, you're back. I was doing okay, but maybe it's kind of nice to have you. What would we do at the end of the day when the hours are asleep and the time slips away? Children are all that the earth has to show. Children are all that the earth wants to know. There is an allusion here to having little ones, but it's not done in a particularly sexy way. There's nothing erotic about this. It's like a couple sitting down and saying, okay, we've gotten married and the last Cuisinart has been opened and we're back from the honeymoon. And so now what do we want our lives to be together? This is a very sober kind of conversation, as opposed to, okay, we're going to go to bed and whatever happens, happens. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Gord was ahead of his time. And I feel like he probably spent a lot of time thinking about the future, maybe just in general, but also his future and things including like climate change. And he went to the Amazon with David Suzuki, another well-beloved Canadian. And he had a bunch of kids, 7 or 8 kids or something. So when you become a parent, and I know you probably know this because you are a parent, when you become a parent, you only think of the future, right? Like that's just, it's so ingrained in your head. Like, oh, I have to get him prepared for this or that or whatever. So I think that's also a nod to him having Miles and then Meredith soon after, and just thinking about their future. And maybe that's why he started performing again. Who knows? Maybe he wanted them to be set for their future. He does have a couple of other songs about children as well. So I think he loved kids, for sure.
Oh, there's no doubt that he loved kids. And I think he's thinking about the future in a way that he couldn't in his younger years. One, because when you're young, you don't want to think necessarily about the future. You just kind of live for today. And I think that's true for any generation. I mean, a lot of people would say, okay, well, that was what the baby boomers thought, or that's what the kids in the 60s thought. I think when I was 18 and in my mid 20s, did I really want to think about what I was going to be doing 20, 30 years from now? Of course not. I mean, I wanted to think about, I want to enjoy my time right now. I want to get through this semester. I want to enjoy the date that I'm with. I want to enjoy the trip that I'm on. And tomorrow takes care of itself. And when you get to be 54, I'm not quite that old now, you do realize that you have to think about what is left, what is coming right in front of you, as opposed to what you're experiencing in the moment. So in that sense, it's kind of a statement of the human condition, if you think.
Yeah, it's really interesting, too, that coming from what you're saying, because he was born pre-World War II. So his childhood would have been very much different. I mean, obviously, I wasn't around during World War II, but, the things that they would have to prepare for and think about and rationing and all that stuff, you almost do kind of have to think of the future. But how do you think of the future when there's a huge war going on?
Yeah, and you're talking about a generational thing. I mean, we're also talking about something that I have a little bit of contact with. Yes. My dad and Gordon were in the same generation. My dad was born in 1935. Gordon was born in 1938 or 9. So they were both young children when it was over. And so there may not have been an existential idea of, okay, well, we may not make it, but there is certainly a consciousness of mortality. If you think about all the Americans, all the Canadians, all the Russians, my God, who died in the conflict. And that is to say nothing of the victims of the Holocaust and other things that happened during that time, the victims of the atomic bomb attacks. Just the mortality of those people who died in this war. And even as small children, I can see people like Gordon Lightfoot and people like Jerry Messner hearing about this and realizing that there is an end to life in a way that their children, meaning Meredith, Miles, me, you, if we want to stretch it a little bit further, we're not as cognizant of it. 9/11 did what it did. The Vietnam War did what that did. But World War II was carnage in a way that nobody had ever conceived of. Even people who had lived through World War I hadn't really thought of this. So I think you're right on. And wow, I didn't think we were going to get that historical in this conversation. But
you never know what's going to happen on Carefree Highway Revisited. You never know.
Ain't it the truth? Up here in the Northland, up here in the snow. And I think that is probably your favorite line of the whole song.
It is.
Right there.
I just love it so much.
Up in the wilderness, land of our birth, land of our toil, land of our worth, I could stay healthy and wealthy and wise, for I love the snow other snowbirds criticize. And I thought the word snowbird was kind of interesting because when I think of snowbirds, I think about people who live in the northeast of the United States, or maybe people who live in Quebec, Ontario, those provinces who can't stand the cold weather. And so they were going to go south. And in an American context, that would probably mean Florida, where they own condos, they have property. So we're going to wait out until the blizzards that happen in New England and the southern part of Canada are gone. And then we're going to go back to living in New York, Boston, Toronto, etc. So it's interesting that he's talking about being a snowbird. I guess what I want to know is, do you think that's an appropriate title for him? And two, what are your other thoughts on this line?
I think it's quite funny for a couple of reasons. First, I would like to say, I think the first line, the land of our toil, land of our worth, it really invokes a lot of the imagery from Canadian Railroad trilogy, for instance. And
I was hoping you'd say that.
Yeah, it makes me really think of, even my own French ancestors coming over in New France in the 1600s and whatever it was. And even way before that, our Indigenous people taking care of the lands and living and doing all of those things, surviving. I think that's a really cool segue he makes there. But as for the snowbird thing, I think it's so funny. I mean, I'm in the Northland, as you saw earlier. You guys here listening can't see it, but just feet and feet and feet and feet of snow outside. Our neighbors are actually snowbirds. They go to Florida every year, and then they come home for the summer. I don't think Gordon was a snowbird. I don't think he would ever call himself that. I think it's kind of a little dig at people, because a lot of Canadians love the snow, but a lot of Canadians hate it. And it's like, well, you don't like it, move type of thing. You know what you're getting into. But, he was such a quintessential Canadian. He loved our country. He never left our country. He had the opportunity to go live in California and New York to record. I'm sure it would have made a lot of things a lot easier for him with his career, but he chose to always stay in Toronto. He never left. I also do kind of think he liked the snow. He referred to it in many of his songs. And I think it is like a little dig at people who run away during, the cold, and they go to Florida. Well, we're all here in below freezing.
I had a guest on not that long ago, Jack Ward, who said that part of the reasons that Canadians are who and what they are, the characteristics of Canadians, is that during the winter, they have to stay inside. And that means that they have to learn to get along with people. They have to learn to share experiences. They have to learn to be in close quarters. And that makes them maybe more polite than other nationalities, where if it's a milder climate, if you don't like something, you can say, okay, that's it, I'm gone. I'll go someplace else. And I don't want to get too far into sociology of Canadians at this point, but I thought I'd bring that up just apropos of what you've been saying. Any thoughts on what Jack had to say?
That's hilarious. I absolutely love that. That's really, really funny. Yeah, we have a big history, especially our Indigenous culture, of storytelling. Canadians love going out. It'll be -25 and we'll still go out and play in the snow or go skiing or skating, whatever, go play hockey. But when it gets colder, sometimes where I live, it can get to -40 Celsius. So you're not going out in that. So you sit around the fire, you tell stories, there's a lot of folklore there and things like that. So that's a good point. I like that. I'm going to think more on that now, because you don't like the person you live with. Well, Canadian winter nights are long, so you need to figure it out.
Well, yeah. And Jack, if you're listening, I can put you in touch with Adele and the two of you can discuss this.
Because I would love that. Yes.
Yeah, tell that to a wife and you'll get a surprise. Now, I have to speak to you as a wife at this point, because I thought of it. There's a couple of different possibilities here. The surprise might be guess what? We're going to have a new addition to the family in a few months. Mm-hmm. Or it could be that you tell this that you love the snow and your wife is going to say, okay, well, then you go out and play in it. I'm going to stay here, or get out. We're not going to be married anymore. So it's a delightfully funny line, but I don't know what angle you think he is taking on that.
I'm not sure. This is a line, whenever I hear it, I always laugh. I have no idea. I've never been able to crack it. I don't really know. I always think of Kim, his current wife. They weren't married at that time. So like I said before, not a lot is known about Elizabeth. She's pretty private. I do think she was American, though. I don't think she was Canadian. So I don't know if he's meaning, oh, surprise, I'm pregnant. I did just read in the Jennings book that she did become pregnant fairly quickly after they moved in together or they started dating. So it could be that. Cold Canadian winter nights.
Canadian winter nights.
I'll tell you, exactly.
I don't think you get pregnant by playing in the snow. I just read an article on that.
Canadian snow is different, though. It hits different. I don't know. It's the water. I don't know. It's different. So I don't know if it could be that, or it could be she's saying, well, yeah, you like the snow so much, you can go shovel, or, you can go snow blow, or it could just be her hating the snow. I don't know. It's a funny line, and I love it. I'm glad he put it in there. It's cute.
And then he gets into one of my favorite, just because it's so sweeping, the skies of North America. So he's incorporating this idea that a lot of his audience is going to be in the States. It's not all going to be in Canada. And he's obviously very familiar with, I don't know if there was any part of the States that he never went to. Covered in stars, over factories and farms, over hamlets and bars, the breeze of North America is breathless at night. Out there in the distance, some souls are in flight, some soft-hearted lovers whose goals are in sight. Now, we'll come back to your favorite lines in that little stanza in just a second. But I love the fact that he's incorporating that. And as an American, I have my own thoughts on what my country has done, both in the positive and the negative. But I do like the fact that he didn't say the skies of Canada. He could have said that. It was his song, and he certainly felt strongly about that. But I'm glad that he realized that there's a lot of overlap between American and Canadian culture, particularly in the winter, but not just in the winter. I also thought of soft-hearted lovers whose goals are in sight. I couldn't help thinking of the song from The King and I, which is "Hello, young lovers, whoever you are," when it's sung by the female protagonist, and she sees this young couple in Siam. She looks at them and says, "Hey, I've been there," because her character has been widowed. And so here she is to help the Yul Brynner character teach his kids. It's a delightful musical. And so I think that Gordon may have also seen himself, I've been young, I've been in love, maybe I've been with someone where we're trying to go out and start on our own. I don't know that he and Britta had to elope, but the idea of people who are in flight, which implies running away from something. I also conjured up this idea, well, they're eloping because she's already pregnant. They don't want to have a shotgun wedding, so they're running away to get married and to start all over again. Those are the lines that you kind of cited at the very beginning of our conversation. I wanted to know if you wanted to go any further with them.
I think just to touch on the beginning of it, as the skies of North America, I think I'm glad he did, not just say Canada, because like you said, his fan base was, I think, probably mostly in Canada, but he had tons of fans in the States. You can't deny that, of course. And especially if you were in a plane, that's what it makes me think of. If you were flying over North America at night, you would see all these things. And to me, flying over the prairies of Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Alberta, see all the farmland for us. I'm sure it's the same for you guys in the Midwest, I would imagine.
The Dakotas, Illinois, Iowa, maybe Kansas and Nebraska, sure.
So, it reminds me of that. And then this covered with stars, it reminds me of the Northern Lights. That's all I can think of. I mean, I don't know America that well, but I know like where I am, you can see the Northern Lights sometimes. So that's what that reminds me of. And I'm sure he saw them on his canoe trips. It's just a beautiful line. And the way he makes a comparison between Hamlet and bars, how would you ever put that together? But it's going from, the country, I think of Hamlet's like maybe out on Vancouver Island or on the East Coast, and then thinking about like the bars in Toronto or something. It's just kind of all encompassing, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's his tapestry line, I think would be a good way of saying it. We'll be right back to our conversation with Adele Chalifoux about Waiting for You. But first, a word from a podcast partner or two.
Sandro, look!
Yes, Zach? Wait, what's that thing you're holding up?
It's a time travel device. We can use it to go back to the past and watch movies.
But we already do that on our podcast, Oldie But a Goodie.
No. On previous episodes, we were pretending to time travel. Now we can do it for real.
Cool, so we can really go back to like the 80s or the 90s?
No, Sandro, you're thinking too little. I mean, we could go really far back. Like we travel back over 100 years into the past.
Oh, but Zach, that's so far in the past. Those movies would be old.
Yeah, but, well, our show is called Oldie But a Goodie, so we should probably do old movies.
Oh, that's a good point.
That's right, folks. This year on Oldie But a Goodie, we're going back further than ever before.
Wait, who are you talking to?
We're starting in 1920s, doing one movie from that year, and then moving up to 1921. And we're continuing that until the year 1969.
Nice.
Join our time-traveling journey through cinema by subscribing now to Oldie But a Goodie out wherever you get your podcasts.
That's Not Canon Productions podcast.
Hey, this is our new podcast. We're going to make this podcast. It's going to be Victorian. It's going to be new. It's going to be us reading and then breaking it down in the same episode. Be excited. Listen to these horror stories that are actually going to be similar to your life today. This is the transition episode where we go from YouTube, Facebook into the podcast. This is what we're planning on doing. We have content already. Go ahead and watch, listen on YouTube and Facebook. But now it's pretty much just audio only. So we're going to bring it to you in an audio format. And here it is. We're going to narrate a book, and then we're going to break it down into the things that you have learned about the Victorian era, and then the crossover between the Victorian era everyday life to the 21st century everyday life, right?
Victorian Periodical Parade. Victorian Periodical Parade.
Absolutely.
And then he finishes up by saying, here in my off again, on again, style, smile, grin, skin, waiting for you to say, let us begin. And it's a nice set of rhymes. It's almost Mother Goose kind of things, but it's kind of an acknowledgement that sometimes he's been very charming and sometimes he's been an absolute ass. Sometimes he has been cheerful. Sometimes he's been absolutely as depressed as you can get. But he's still hoping that his lady, with all of the scars from his past and all of the misbehaviors, all of the mistakes, although by this time he's been sober going on 10 years, if not quite 10 years, he's still saying to Elizabeth, let's start this new chapter. And I think it's an absolutely brilliant way to end the song, because he's saying, let us begin. And I'm glad he didn't start the song with that, because, you know, where are you going to go after you say, let's us begin?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think in quintessential Gordon style, there's such a deep meaning to even just a few words, right? It could be exactly as you said, let's begin of a new relationship. Let's begin the show. Let's begin the tour. Let's begin the recording. Let's begin the writing process. I think, like I said, he was such a hopeless romantic. I think he's had so many new starts in his life, and that could also be a nod to that. Who knows? It's the mystery of Gordon Lightfoot. We'll never know.
You know, I would have liked to have seen some of the set lists, because I know he played this song a lot in the last years of his career. We'll talk about the numbers in a second or two, but I didn't see where in his sets he would do this song. But I think this would be a great opener for his concerts, saying, let us begin. I don't know if he would have characterized as a toe tapper, but I certainly would, that it's a great to start a concert. Well, the song did appear on Waiting for You. That was his 18th, good grief, 18th original album. It was released in 1993. It was the 7th song on the record. It was released as a single, didn't chart. The album did go to 24 in Canada, which of course says that his main listening base was in Canada. Did not chart anyplace else in the English-speaking world. And that kind of brings us to the musical aspects. I think if I had to choose one, it would probably be the synth or the keyboard, because it just brought just the right ambiance that I don't think any other instrument would have done. Maybe with an organ, the same kind of organ sound that we had on Summer Side of Life. But even that would have given a different feel to it. So I got to say that the keyboards done by Barry Heffernan, of course, were probably my favorite part. What was your favorite part of the music in this song?
Aside from the lyrics, I think I really like you. I like the synthesizer. It's kind of almost like an accordion style. That's what I kept thinking of. And it was just like, oh, that's so cute and Canadian, I guess, a small town in Canada. But I also really like the guitar too. I like the kind of like scale notes that they played, and it kind of like led you into each of the verses. It was just such a simple, but again, beautiful song, like most of his things, right?
I think something else, getting a little bit more into the musicology of this, it's written in 3/4, which is unusual.
Kind of waltzy, isn't it?
It is waltzy, yes. And most Western music is not written in 3/4. It's written in 4/4. It provides a feel to it that you wouldn't get if it was some other sort of time signature. This was back to a pretty basic setup. I mean, if you look at the personnel on Salute, and then you look at the personnel here, it's just 5 guys: Gordon, Terry, Rick, Mike Heffernan, and Barry Keane, drums and percussion. That's it. No one is listed as guesting on this. Nobody else did any vocals. So it's more stripped down, but I don't think it suffers for that. As a matter of fact, I think it's more authentically Gordon. He played this song 675 times, which is why I said I wanted to look at the set lists. First one was in the Academy of Music in Philadelphia on September 23rd, 1992, probably after it had been recorded, but before the album was released. So he probably introduced it by saying, hey, you're going to get a preview of some tunes on the next album. There hadn't been an album since 1986. So I think his fans must have been, great, he's back. You know, we're going to be, we'll be able to buy his stuff and we'll be able to listen to it over and over again. And then the most recent one was coming up on 2 years ago, and it was at the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall in Troy, New York in April of 2022. So towards the end of his life and his recording career. So certainly it was something that he loved to have in his set, and I'm sure his audiences enjoyed it as well. Is there anybody that you would like to hear cover this? I can't find any official covers of this song anywhere.
No, I agree. I couldn't find anything. There was a few YouTube covers and things like that, but no one, you know, super famous. I thought hard about this. Don't come at me for me saying this, but the only person that popped into my brain, I have no idea why, and it might even just be a disaster, was Bryan Adams. I don't know why. I can't explain it. I haven't heard or seen a thing from Bryan Adams in 20 years. I don't know, but Bryan Adams. But I don't know if there's anyone else who could do the song justice. I don't know if there's a good comparison out there. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Interesting you say that, because I've got tickets to see Bryan Adams next weekend.
Oh, that's exciting.
I seriously doubt he'll play this song, but you never know. Yeah, I thought about Bryan Adams, and he's too much of a pop artist, I think, to really get into this. I couldn't think of any particular bands, but if there was an Irish band, not U2, but if there were a band that was really doing authentic Irish music, I would like to have heard them do this. The Clancy brothers, if you really want to go back to the 60s, and maybe Gordon knew the Clancy brothers or Tommy Makem, but other than that, I couldn't really think of anyone that I'd really, oh, wow, you know, they should try this. So this is one of those where I'm thinking it stands alone, and probably it deserves to.
I agree. It's pretty sad that this, I mean, like so many of his songs and his stuff didn't chart really. I know the album got pretty rave reviews from what I was reading in Canada and the States. I don't know. I don't think he got airplay, quite frankly, by anybody. But
my sense of it is that Reprise did not work that album very hard. And I think the other part of it is that Gordon had been out of people's minds for 6, maybe 7 years at this point. So if he was coming back, it was not this really innovative thing where the record company said, okay, we're going to make money off of this. Mm-hmm. I don't think it was simply done to satisfy a contract obligation, because it's really good music. But at least in the States, it probably wasn't well promoted. And if you think about 1993, I mean, who did he have to compete with to get radio time? There was a lot of great bands, a lot of great acts in the early 90s that were taking up people's attention. Maybe it wasn't the greatest quality music as we look at it now 30 years later, but the fact remains that Gordon had to compete with that. And 54-year-old Canadian folk singer who hasn't recorded anything since 1986, and it's arguably a completely different genre of music than it had been. It's a shame, but there were probably reasons for why it didn't do better in terms of radio play. Doesn't make it right, just makes it more understandable.
I can see that. I can see that. On the flip side, though, I would counter argue and say a 54-year-old Canadian folk star, extraordinaire icon, legend, whatever you want to say, who hasn't produced anything in almost 10 years is back. Look at the track list on that album. Like, there's some pretty deep, heavy hitters on that album. So it's just sad. I think throughout his whole career, honestly, I don't know if it was the record label or his promoter or lack thereof. I don't know. But I think he was let down a lot, and he could have had way more fame and acknowledgement than he did have, which I'm sure he's fine with. He was a very humble guy. But I think he was just never properly promoted. And even for myself, I grew up small town Canada, and I don't ever remember hearing any of his songs played on the radio, ever. My parents were musicians. Music was always in our life, and I never heard it. So even now, I never hear, even songs like Sundown, never hear. The first time I heard Gordon Lightfoot on the radio, I was in Anchorage, Alaska, of all places. I was walking through a mall. I was actually going to the washroom, and I ran out, and I was like, oh my God, do you hear it? So I think it was Steel Rail Blues or something, just like absurd. But Anchorage, Alaska. Never in Canada. I have never heard it since. So
you may have been listening to the station that was run by my friend Kevin McClear and his family. And I've had Kevin on a couple of times to talk about it because he's a native Alaskan. And so he'd have a perspective on that. So as we're kind of wrapping up here, number one, do you have any closing thoughts on this song? And then the one that we have to ask, and that I'm asking all my guests at this point, where were you and what were you doing when you found out that Gordon had passed away? And full disclosure, you were the one who told me the news, because I'd been out with my family, and I came home and pulled my phone out, and I got a message from you saying, oh, Mike, please tell me it's not true. So let's wrap up with this song first, then we'll go to the other.
I don't think I have any closing thoughts other than it's beautiful. It's just what we come to know and love from Gordon Lightfoot. It's one of his greats, I think. A little known, but should be more known.
Okay, so the fateful day in May 2023. Yeah. So how did you find out?
Awful. So I think, like a lot of his hardcore fans and his family, I'm sure, we're still grieving it. It's a weird thing to grieve someone who you didn't know. And I had heard a couple of days before the CBC had published a story saying that he had canceled all of his upcoming shows. And I remember seeing that and going, oh no, like red flag, but hopefully he'll pull through. He's had a lot of scares before. And I was sitting in bed going to sleep and got that, oh my God, that headline. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget that feeling. I just started crying instantly. And I think I ran to my husband, and I was just so in shock, and I was just like, couldn't really get the words out. And I messaged you immediately. I also messaged Deb. She's famous on your podcast. All know and love Deb. I messaged her too right away, and a couple of other of my friends. And I started getting messages from people saying, oh, I'm so sorry. That's where I was. I think I just cried for a day straight. Even if it's something like that is coming, because the man was frail. He was in his 80s. After that, I was able to go because I am in close proximity to Aurelia. My husband and my son and I, we actually did drive down to Aurelia at the church, and I was able to stand and touch his coffin, and it was all just so surreal and just so bizarre and sad. But on the flip side, standing in that line, I got to meet a lot of really awesome people. One man in particular, he was in his late 80s or 90s. He knew Gord. Brian, you're out there listening. What a sweetheart you were. We were chums the whole time. He was from Aurelia. He showed me, that's the house me and my wife first moved into. And he was a teacher, so he taught some of Gord's family. And we got to exchange some really cool stories, and we took a picture together. And really sweet guy. He actually introduced me to Gord's nephew when we were in the church, but it was all, there's just really no words. I'm very lucky that I was able to go. They did ring the bell 30 times, one for every early Edmund Fitzgerald and once for him. So yeah, it was, well, you and I have talked so much since then, so you know how I feel about it all. But yeah, it's very sad. We're all still grieving, I think.
Yeah. And I don't know that that's anything unnatural about grieving the loss of someone that we didn't know personally. And this is something that I quoted out of context, but I think is relevant. And I'm going to quote it one more time. When Franklin Roosevelt died, there was this old African-American gentleman who was just beside himself as the caisson of the funeral procession went by. And somebody came up to say, "Oh, sir, I didn't know that you knew President Roosevelt." And this man looked at his visitor and said, "I didn't know him. He knew me." Mm-hmm. And I think that is kind of a good way to stop, to acknowledge the impact that he had and continues to have on our lives.
Absolutely.
So Adele Chalifoux, it's always an absolute joy to talk to you. You're going to be appearing on another one of my broadcasts in the President's Service this coming summer. And definitely want to have you back on the show in season 4. Thank you for taking the time away from the feral kid and from your husband, especially on a day like today. And please don't slip in the snow, because we needed all the good people around here.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. And how exciting. Almost 4th season? Yeah, Mike.
We're going to be wrapping up the 3rd season in May, and then we'll go to the 4th season sometime after that. And thanks for listening, everybody. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it. Carefree Highway Revisited is on Apple, Spotify, Acast, or wherever you get your listening matter. Our website is www.lightfootpodcast.com. I'd like to make a special request for you to visit my Patreon page. I love this show so much, and I want to keep it going, and you're in a position to help. Please head over to www.patreon.com/Carefree Highway Revisited. $1 or $2 a month is all I ask. You can reach me, Mike Messner, at teachermike72@gmail.com. So our next episode will feature Jeffrey Coast. He's making his 3rd appearance on the show, and he and I will be talking about the song Tattoo from the 1983 Salute album. That episode will be coming out in February of 2024. Until then, for Adele Chalifoux, this is Mike Messner reminding you, run for the roses, but don't forget to stop and smell them. We'll see you next time.